I remember a lot from it.
Do you remember him coming up with that beat?
I sort of knew the beat. Steve and I go way back, and we took a camping trip way back when he got out of the Army, and our wives with us across the country, long trip, and sometimes he'd be with me and I'd be driving, and he'd be playing that pretty much that riff on the dashboard.
Okay.
For 6 hours.
Okay.
So, oh, that beat. I think I know. Or he'd be playing a rudimental based on rudiment riffs that he's so good at, and it's so brilliant. Well, first of all, for me to hear it, I haven't actually listened to that much of the record in quite a bit. It's just there's so much on it that strikes me as really special, and I'm grateful to be reminded of it.
It sounds amazing.
Sounds amazing. So Paul's process when I worked with him was pretty much this: he'd have the song, and maybe he had all the words, maybe not. He'd play guitar, and he'd first go over to Richard T. and just play it alone with Richard playing the Fender Rhodes.
Okay. Till
Richard got his part, but Richard immediately always played the perfect part, as did Eric Gale, who was usually there, the guitar player. Just now I noticed that he doesn't play much, and then suddenly he does a little riff on guitar, Eric Gale, that's like perfect.
The perfect riff.
Yeah. So he'd go to Richard, and then he'd maybe come to me or Steve next, and Steve would just came up with that part, just kind of fell into it almost right away. And later, Paul said, and this says something about Paul. He said, well, let's take that drum riff and let's just start with that. It sounds like a little thing, but it's as much as he had worked on that piece, and he had a great piece, and it's one of my favorite pieces I'll talk about in a minute, but it is a great piece, not just the hook and the humor of it, but he heard something and said, oh yeah, let's start with that. So he recognized the specialness of that drum thing, not just as a backup drum. So he comes over to me, and as he did on many pieces, he kind of sang it and he played it on guitar, but he also indicated the bass part to me. He sort of sang it, I don't remember exactly what it was, but always melodic, always high.
Yep.
And from a year of doing tracks with him, I became a more melodic player. But the bass player in me needs to play the low notes. And when I heard that, that's not what he sang, but that's what I gravitated towards. But then, because he was singing melodic stuff to me for that too. But that's when it's working really well in the studio, when you get ideally the best, for a bass part, that's all I know about bass parts, the best of both worlds, the best of the artist's ideas and me, the bass player. And so it was a joy playing on those. When you consider the lyrics to that song, the verse, before you, what is it, the problem's all inside your head, she said to me. And you already know there's two characters here, and she's a little aggressive, and he's got a little bit of a problem, you know, all that. It's just only the song hasn't even started yet. It's a remarkable piece of writing, which is almost typical of Paul. He's just a brilliant writer, and his voice sounds fantastic on that too.
I'd like to take a second to talk to you about this channel. This is actually Rick Beato 2. I've had it since the beginning of my main channel, and many of you are not subscribed. As a matter of fact, 87% of the people that watch this channel regularly are not subscribed. So I encourage you to hit the subscribe button on this channel and on my main channel. This will help me get even more of my dream guests and help continue to grow both channels. Thank you. The chord progressions that he came up with are just so beautiful, so brilliant, so intricate. Yeah. And yet they just flow like water.
Yeah. Well, a testament to a talent like that is to keep in mind that even though he came sort of out of folk and simple guitar playing, I think during the years I worked with him, he was taking theory lessons with Don Sebesky, I think. And you hear the chord progressions on guitar.
Don, the great jazz arranger.
And they're really different than, really different, really than anyone's doing, but certainly than he had done before that. So he wasn't just, here's what I do and I'm doing that, and that's an inspiration to us. You know, that way, I try to be that way as a bass player. Okay, I did that.
So would Paul stand in front of you and play the guitar part, and then you would kind of...
Absolutely, and we would do that until he was happy with the part.
Yeah.
Like I said, 30 seconds with Richard T., but 15 minutes with me. I'm just guessing, but you know, till it was not the whole part, but the sense of it.
And ever any charts with Paul?
No, because the rhythm section were the first in there. Later there might be horns or even strings, but No, the rhythm section didn't need to write out parts.
When I listen to this, and when Steve starts out the groove, it is so in the pocket.
Yeah.
It's so perfect.
Played with him night after night for years. I'm just, nobody would be capable of being just like falling over themselves every night. That's the way he can play, you know, pretty special.
Now, were there ever gigs playing in Rochester? You're playing with Gap Mangione and you and Steve or something, and Steve would play these insane things that you would remember? And
Good question. There were a lot of nights and a lot of stuff, and probably not in the. We did 6.5 hours a night. We had 2 gigs with Gap every night, and it was covers of material that was popular. There were no drum solos in that. In other contexts, he did drum solos, and certainly we took an arranging class together in school, and you can bet there was a drum solo in my arrangement. Because how do you want your piece to be a hit? Well, you give Steve a solo. It's something Steely Dan was to learn later.
how much did you play with click tracks back in the day?
It depends when in the day is.
Like that, something like this. Would that be with a click track, or would he just start playing the groove?
I think that wasn't a click track.
Okay.
My memory's not perfect of
Yeah.
that. When I first moved to New York, I was really lucky to stay with a school friend. Dixon Van Winkle is his name, and was an aspiring engineer working at A&R Studio, but he was just aspiring. He hadn't connected yet, which he did later.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, Tony, come in at night at like 11 or midnight. I got the studio then, and we can and I can practice recording bass, and I try out different gear. I said, okay, I'll do that. And he said, there's this thing called a click track. You're gonna need to know about that. So this would be in, early 70s. I could, with time, I could figure out the year, but early 70s. And I played with a metronome, sure.
Yep.
But I had never heard of a click track. And I would be in there, and he would be working on the bass sound, and I would play loud, and I would play soft, and I would practice a very easy thing. I'm playing with a click track. It's not hard.
Right.
And it served me well, because especially jingles or the kind of record session where they only have 3 hours, where they have 4 minutes to do the drum sound, no minutes to do the bass. You got better have a Fender Precision, and then we're doing the thing. So sometimes those would have click tracks. Probably not so much in the early 70s sometimes, but jingles always used them because they needed to be exactly 60 seconds long.